Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unworthy History. We try to bring you actual history on this channel that you won't find on TV. Now, today I'm going to bring some more actual history to you from this book right here. This is Indian Depredations in Texas by J.W. Wilbarger. And so the story I'm going to read today takes place in Erath County. That county includes Stephenville and Dublin, as well as some other cities. This is taking place. There's not an exact date that's given, but this is taking place around 1860 or the late 1850s or so. So Erath County was actually settled by George Erath and then also by Neil McLennan. So you might remember Neil McLennan from a recent episode I did on his nephew, John McLennan, who had been taken by Comanches, and then he was returned about 10 years later. At first, he didn't want to go back to the settlements, but then he was enticed by some of the women who were paying attention to him. So anyhow, this story is also about a young man who is enticed by women, and I think it's a very interesting story about this young man named Saunders. One of the most remarkable escapes ever made from Indians was that of a young man by the name of Saunders, who settled in Erath County at an early day. As he was pretty well educated and there were quite a number of families where he had taken up his abode, they built a schoolhouse and employed him to teach their children. Not long after his arrival in the county, he made the acquaintance of a young lady who lived at a settlement 10 miles distant from the one where he resided, while she was visiting a family in the neighborhood. It was another case of love at first sight, or in the backwoods parlance, he fell dead at the first fire. After the young lady returned home, as regularly as Saturday came round, young Saunders was off to see his sweetheart, and as the emoluments of his school were not sufficient to enable him to keep a horse, he usually made his weekly trips on the Shanks mare. Now, I had to look this up, but the Shanks mare, that actually means walking. So if someone's taking the Shanks mare, that meant they were walking rather than riding a horse. And as the sequel will show, a better never lifted leg. Young Saunders was as green as a cat seed watermelon in everything pertaining to frontier life, and as the Indians had not made a raid into the county since his arrival, he thought he could travel to the short distance between the two settlements safely on foot. One Saturday morning, when he was about starting on his customary trip, some of his friends told him that traveling on foot and unarmed in that country was a very risky business, but he supposed that they were merely trying to intimidate him for their own amusement, and paid no attention to their warning. He had gone about halfway between the two settlements when he heard the most diabolical yells behind him, and turning to look, he discovered about 20 mounted Indians coming after him at full speed. There was a dense body of timber a half a mile or so to the left of the road he was traveling, and towards it young Saunders, now realizing the emergency of the case, put off at a 2:30 lick. As he was young and active and badly scared besides, he made such good speed that for a while the Indians gained but little on him, but unfortunately, or perhaps I should say fortunately, when within a few hundred yards of the timber, he struck his foot against a stone and pitched head foremost upon the ground. As he fell, his hand came in contact with a stick, and for the same reason, I suppose, that a drowning man will catch at a straw, he instinctively grasped it. By the time he had regained his feet, still holding the stick in his hand, the Indians had come up with him, and began to let their arrows fly at him with a thick and fast. Young Saunders turned and presented his stick towards them, which proved to be a black, half-burnt sumac root, about the length of a six-shooter, and with a crook at one end resembling the handle. The Indians, of course, at a little distance, supposed it was a six-shooter, and drew back. The young man, taking advantage of their halt, again put in his best licks to reach the timber, but the Indians soon came up with him, and he was forced to turn and present his formidable sumac root at them, which demonstration was followed by the same results. By repeating this maneuver whenever the Indians pressed him closely, young Saunders finally succeeded in reaching the timber, and made his escape without having received a scratch, although his clothes were cut in many places with arrows. The Indians did not follow him any further, no doubt concluding that it would not be safe to follow a man into the thick timber who was armed with a sumac root, and reserved his fire until he could make sure of his enemy. The parties to whom I am indebted for this account of Mr. Saunders' escape from the Indians did not inform me as to the finale of his love affair, and knowing as well as I do the chivalrous characters of young Texas, I do not think it worth while to make any inquiries about it. I am perfectly confident that the young man did not discontinue his weekly pilgrimage to the shrine of his lady love, for fear of meeting Indians on the way. On the contrary, I feel assured that he purchased a horse and a six-shooter with the first available funds he acquired, and that he did not cease to pay his Saturday visits to his inamorata until she became Mrs. Saunders. It is said that the course of true love never does run smooth, but at least in Mr. Saunders' case it ran fast enough to save his scalp, and I do not think I am running myself before the hounds when I assert that in all probability Mr. and Mrs. Saunders are now numbered among the cattle kings and queens of old Erath, and that from the stoop of their hospitable and palatial ranch they can now count 100 bovine herds grazing upon 100 hills. At least no other conjecture is compatible with the known chivalry of the young America of Texas. Viva l'amour, cigars and cognac. So anyhow, if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time here on Unworthy History.